Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Line Change, the NHL betting podcast from the Action Network, presented to you by BetMGM. I'm Michael Leboff. Joining me, as always, is my friend Nick Martin. Nick, this is our Stanley Cup final preview. As we all knew, back on October 1st, it would be the Florida Panthers and Vegas Golden Knights in Stanley Cup final. And Game 1 taking place in Vegas on Saturday night. That's June the 3rd. We'll start from kind of the big picture, look at the series. Vegas minus 130, Florida plus 110. I think that looks about spot on. If it was home ice going the other way, I think Florida would be minus 130, Vegas would be plus 10. You can try to just flip them. There's some funny questions, I think, for both teams to answer here. You start with the goaltending. Will Adin Hill continue to play at the level that he was at? Same with Sergei Bobrovsky after 2 weeks off. And I think the fact that, and like, how does the rest affect Florida? It's 2 weeks. They haven't played in 2 weeks. I know Vegas is having some time off too, but like 2 weeks is a very long time to go from playing, this crazy run of hockey. Like if you go back even into the regular season with Florida, they were playing playoff games since mid-February. You can even go to like the All-Star break, and then they get a 2-week break, and now they got to pick it back up for the championship series. So there's that question. And I think a lot of the questions don't really have kind of logical look at the data answers to them, which makes me think,
100%.
which is why
Yeah,
I
I
don't.
really agree with that. And that was the one thing I found the more rest versus rust narratives I dove into was that there's not a lot you can just be like, this is 100% going to apply. Like there's teams on 7 days rest, which I know is not nearly the same. They're 41 and 35 if you want to pull data that has a big sample in a series. So, but I mean, those,
But
if you
Vegas,
have
Vegas is also at, like they're on, what are they going to be on,
for
six,
sure.
6 or 7 days
And
rest as
that
well?
trend, like half those teams would have been a pretty huge favorite, chances are. If you rest for seven
Yes.
days, you
Yeah.
probably won in a 4 game sweep. So it's not like it's a good sample to pull from. And then I think the other one that I looked at, Colorado sat for 9 days last year. They were a really, really good team. So who knows? I don't really think you
Yep.
can bank on that, but it just shows that, I mean, you can definitely make it work.
Yeah. We're not dealing with that team here at all. Uh, so that's one question that I think you can have an opinion on it and fine, you can make your arguments about it, but I don't think that there's any data backed or true 100% logic backing on either way you feel. And then the goaltending too, right? Like Bobrovsky's been incredible. He's the deserving Conn Smythe favorite right now. Adin Hill has been fantastic. He is 10-1 to win the Conn Smythe despite only playing one full round. But like Bobrovsky coming into the playoffs, we knew what he was for the past 2 seasons, 3 seasons. An inconsistent goalie. He shows flashes and then he tails off and his form is all over the place. Before game one, or he didn't even start game one of round one, but before round one, you would have said, is Sergei, if someone asked you, is Sergei Bobrovsky a reliable goaltender in a playoff series right now at this point in his career, you just say no. The same question about Adin Hill, the answer would be absolutely not. Um, but either one of them could go in any direction, which is, Bobrovsky could steal the series, Hill could steal the series, or they can both fall flat. One of them could play well, one of them could play bad. It's goaltending. We have no idea. So this is another question that I don't think has any kind of answer to. I think you'd say that you'd feel a little safer betting on Bobrovsky as a plus 110 underdog than Hill as a minus 130 favorite. But the number's still like, it's not as exciting. It's not exciting enough to be like, I'm all in fading Adin Hill here at plus 160. So that's another thing that's pointing me to not betting the series price and just kind of sitting back.
Yeah, I'm not really interested in the series price either. And I think that the easy case for Hill, I mean, he's getting way better team play. I think if you're going to look at it fairly, like I think Vegas is a better defensive team. They've got a way better defensive core top to bottom. So I don't think you're counting on him needing to do as much. Like whereas like if Bob in this series, if Bob is bad and Vegas won and Florida won, I would be quite surprised. And I know you could probably say that about either goalie, but like I could see a world where Vegas like makes that work, getting some pretty middling goaltending. Whereas Florida, I think it's like Bobrovsky dominates or they don't win, which is why I kind of actually, I still think if you want to just play Bobrovsky to win the Conn Smythe, I'd almost just prefer that to a Florida series price and live with it. But yeah, he's been so good. And to be a little fair to Bob too, in terms of like how surprising it truly is, he was pretty good versus Tampa when they got swept last year.
Yeah.
It just kind of fell apart. And then the other thing I listened to, I was kind of wondering what our takes from the start of line change this postseason. So if there's a good one, it was the game one of the Florida series. It's just interesting listening to it back that we thought Florida had actually done quite well versus Boston and said, if they play like that, they're alive. But the problem is I don't think they're ever going to get 50-50 goaltending with Allmark versus Lyon at the time. And then it's funny that it ends up being they go on this crazy run in large due to the goaltending they get.
Yeah. Just kind of goes to show you how we say it before, at the end of the regular season too. Like the NHL's regular season, this entire season, including the playoffs, ended up bubbling and climaxing at one game, and it was between the Pittsburgh Penguins and Chicago Blackhawks. The Penguins were minus 520 favorites, and they lost to Peter Mrazek and the Blackhawks. That not only put the Islanders in the playoffs, but it also put the Panthers into the playoffs into a spot where they'd play Boston in round one, and then it ended up tilting the draft lottery to Bedard. Like, we do our best to handicap, but when the games actually start getting played, nobody's sitting there on October 1st or April 1st before the playoffs saying, I think this is how the path is going to end up. And it's going to end up with Peter Mrazek being the most important player, I think, objectively of the season so far. That was the most important performance of the season objectively, was Peter Mrazek playing for the Chicago Blackhawks against the Pittsburgh Penguins. So it's tough to tell. But all that said, like, I don't think the prices are exciting series wise. I do kind of like the over in game one. I think everybody's going to be betting this under. It's 5.5 now. I wouldn't be surprised to see it get juiced pretty heavily towards the under. I think a lot of people are going to accept that it's going to be a feeling out process. I don't think that there's flaw in that. I think it's probably true. These are two teams from different conferences. They will try to figure out what the other team does well, what weaknesses can we exploit. But I do think that there's a pretty good chance that Florida especially just comes out as maybe rusty and just the attention to details a little off, and Vegas can catch them. We've said it all along with Florida, it hasn't worked out because the unders keep hitting because of Bobrovsky. But if you need your goaltender to play as well as he's played, it means that you're having issues defensively. And if the 2 weeks off kind of hurt more than they help him, then I think you're looking at what could be an under game. And we know that Florida can score pretty quickly. Like, they're a very good counter punching team, turn the puck over, go on the rush, and be clinical. So I don't mind betting this over despite what we've seen out of, especially Florida for this postseason.
Yeah, I really agree. I think that it's actually quite a good spot for the over. And there's a lot of things that work in its favor. They're going to want to feel each other out, but a huge part of it too is, goals happen when people make mistakes, maybe in a really high intensity, nervy kind of first game. We see more of those. Vegas penalty kill that's been their biggest weakness this postseason. I know part of that was that they played Edmonton, and Dallas's power play was really going good this playoff too, but I think it's reasonable to think Florida can do some damage there. And I think another part of that too is goaltending is harder to hide on the penalty kill, where you're always going to get some shots where shooters have time to pick a spot, or spots where goaltenders are moving more, which makes it harder to hide a guy like Hill, who he's been really good, but it's insane that like his GSAX is actually sitting close with Bob in terms of per game rate this playoff, because I don't think he's been that good. So I think that's one area where Florida can probably get to him. And then, yeah, I think Vegas, like, you look at what they've done this playoffs and the quality of goaltenders they've played. Maybe the Jets defensively weren't quite all there, but like, they destroyed Hellebuck by the end of that. Stuart Skinner, maybe he just wasn't playing that well, but they did really get to him. And then I guess the same could be said for Jake Oettinger, but that is 3 goalies that most people would consider pretty strong goaltenders, and Vegas scored at will on all of them. So I think this one could break open for sure. I think 5.5 could actually prove to be a little bit of a lower total in this series. Maybe maybe not by the end, but particularly early on. And we know Florida, like I guess both teams are really going to want to set a tone. I wouldn't be surprised to see a fair bit of minor penalties compared to an average game here.
For game one player props, I have some bets series wise that I like, but let's just stick with game one. And I'll flip it to you if you're looking at any players in the prop market, whether anytime goal score, shots, etc.
Yeah, for now I kind of just had a goal score or two goal scores. So I think I'm going to go with Jack Eichel as the favorite in the game to score a goal. I guess right there with Kachuk. I think that he's been playing really well. He's due. I like the way it's going to set up for him on the power play. I think that there's just a lot of arguments why it's his time to finally break through. So for me, I think Eichel in a game where Vegas, I actually am projecting them fairly high as the team total. Like I think I'll believe it when I see it if Bob shuts them down as well in this game one. So I like that. And then I know you're big on Duclair, and I agree with that too. I think he's just scoring below kind of expected, like both analytically and the eye test. Like he's dominating on a top line that's really getting going. So I know you want to target him in the series, and I agree with that because I think he's definitely playing quite well.
Yeah, so I'd agree. Like I think Duclair as like a anytime goal scorer, first goal scorer, whatever you want to do there, score two in a game. But like you said, I have a couple guys. We can get the Nick Cousins talk out of the way right away. Once again, I'll be betting Nick Cousins at 200 to 1 to lead this series in goals scored. And it is a donation, but at this point it's just, there's one more series left and I still like the opportunity is still good enough for him playing with Kachuk and Bennett that most players that are in that kind of situation, granted they're usually better players, are just never going to be 200 to 1 to lead a small sample size series in goals. So yep, I'll be on Nick Cousins at 200 to 1 to lead the series in goals. But I like Duclair too. 30 to 1 you can find out there. He is the a type of player that in this kind of rhythm that we're projecting for this series, Vegas being the better 5-on-5 team, kind of owning possession of the puck, Florida looking to punch on the counter. That sets up so well for a player like him. So I'm hoping he can have, like you said, he had a couple of moments, but he hasn't strung together those consistent games in a row. But we know he can. So I'll take him 30 to 1. I think he's, got a great opportunity in terms of usage. He's flying under the radar a little bit because of Kachuk and Barkov or Hagee, etc. So yeah, definitely take a shot on Duclair.
Yeah, and I like for Duclair that Barkov's kind of going offensively a little more now. He's pretty quiet early in the playoffs. I know a lot of people were wondering if he was kind of fighting something or whatever it was, but he was getting going versus Carolina. And Duclair did come through with that huge goal in game four. So, yeah, I agree. I like Duclair to do some damage there. And then on the series leading scorers for me, I think Eichel at plus 700 is by far my favorite chalky one. I think he's really due to break out. He's playing really, really well. So I like Eichel. The number on William Karlsson is all over the place, but if you can get him at 20 to 1, I don't think you need to overthink that. He's a 40 goal scorer. He's leading them goals in the playoffs. He's playing on a really good line. I think at that number, you don't need to overthink it. And then my Nick Cousins kind of guy that I keep going to is I keep thinking that Nick Waugh playing on that line with Karlsson is due
Yep.
to really get going offensively. He has really good touch around the net, which could pay off in a series versus Bobrovsky. I feel like it almost hasn't shown as much as I would expect. Like he's so good in tight and even in shootouts, they use him. So he's one I'm kind of waiting to break through with some big goals, and I'll probably keep looking to that well.
Yeah, I like Wah. I'll probably be on Wah with you. See him out there like 66 to 1. Just to kind of explain a little further on Cousins in case you haven't listened. Like I like William Carrier. I think he's a great, fourth line player, drives play in the right direction, pretty good touch around the net for a big guy, to steal a phrase from soccer. He's 66 to 1 to lead this series in scoring. Like if you're gonna make him 66, I think Cousins should be right there or maybe shorter. Um, and then there's like, Brandon Montour is 40 to 1. And I know he's very good offensive defenseman, but he's still a defenseman. And I think getting Cousins at 5 times the odds is pretty wild. So yeah, it's gonna be Cousins, Duclair, and Wah for me. Let's talk Conn Smythe. Usually at this point of the playoffs, there is almost no like true betting value on the Conn Smythe unless you're looking at it like you are with Bobrovsky. I think you could have done that last year with Cale Makar and the Avalanche. Whereas if you liked the Avalanche to win that series, you could have just bet Makar to win the Conn Smythe. And so outside of that, there's usually just nothing that's truly attractive on the board. But this year's half different. It's Bobrovsky. If Florida wins, it's feels pretty set in stone that it'll be Bobrovsky or Tkachuk. Like Tkachuk would have to have a pretty monstrous series, but he is a media darling. So like you can't discount him yet. But Vegas, Jack Eichel's a favorite. He's 5-1. But then you got Marchessault and Carlson at 6-1. Like you said, Carlson leads them in scoring, in goals. Eichel leads them in points, but he's only 1 point ahead of Marchessault. He's only 3 points ahead of Stone. And another player who I'm going to mention now, that's Ivan Barbashev. He's 66-1 out there. I think you might be able to track down an 80 or higher if you really, file through the cabinet. Barbashev is 3 points behind Eichel. He plays on the first line with Eichel and Marchessault. Like he's in an up. He has a spot where if he had a monstrous series, you would be like, wouldn't be that surprised. And he's going to need it to win. And I know that there's some correlation where if Barbashev has a huge series, it probably means that Eichel is feeding him and driving up his point total too. And I get that, but he shouldn't be this far behind Eichel, Marchessault, Stone, Aiden Hill. I don't think. So I think if you're looking for a long shot, you can make a case for Chandler Stevenson too. But I think Stevenson and Stone, most of their work is going to be done just trying to shut down the Tkachuk line. So I like Barbashev. I actually think it's a good bet. Not just looking for something fun. I think that there's more than enough ways that he wins this Conn Smythe with a huge series here that 66, 80-1, whatever you could find is worth a little sprinkle.
Yeah, I think for me, the Vegas side is just too muddled. Which does work to your point, but I just feel like when you look at this, he'll have to surpass and then get the votes, and they're going to want to do like it just goes to the big name guys. So that's my fear with that, where even if they end up close, you're going to look at like the two-way play of Eichel and Carlson. Just to further note kind of my Bob thoughts, because obviously everyone knows Tkachuk is right there. I think if you polled fans and media, you'd probably get closer to 50-50. So it's a little scary there. Part of my thinking is that I do think this series is going to lend itself more to Bob needing to be good, which is where I'm willing to kind of take that risk, because I fully get the Tkachuk's kind of right there, and probably like 2 game-winning goals would do it. Even if I don't necessarily think that's fair, I think probably Bobrovsky has still done, more. It's a tough argument because obviously they're never here without either one of them. I think is pretty obvious to say. But yeah, I mean, I'm fully considering where Tkachuk is at, and I just think Bob is also on the board. And then the other thing I think that's interesting, there's sites out there offering a position of Conn Smythe winner, and goalie is still plus 200. And I think if you can use one of those, that's actually probably worth giving up this slight bit of extra price, because Aiden Hill's a little in the mix. I don't know how much
he's 10-1, and he'd have to have the goalie version of the series that Barbashev would need to have to win the award, I think, which is playing into why I like Barbashev. Because if it's not going to be Eichel, like if it's going to be Marchessault or Carlson, I still think like they need to have big series, and just because they had a couple really good showings in the past few doesn't mean they're just going to keep that going. So yeah, I think that Barbashev's in the mix enough at a long price to warrant a look.
And this could be like another thing, that we're talking about in a game or two. We'll see. These markets haven't been moving that much. The one that I think a lot of people missed the boat on was probably Bobrovsky because it swung really, really quick 2 games into the Carolina series. But I think other than that, I could see a lot of these staying close where like maybe if you really pay attention, you're thinking you're kind of getting an edge. So we'll see how it goes on that
And
front.
I do want to make one note about Bobrovsky too is if Florida goes down 2-0 or 2-1 or 3-1, I think you can maybe make a case to buy in on Bobrovsky at that point as again too instead of the Florida series price. So if you think like the 2-1 is short and you're like kind of like on the fence about it, then Florida loses game one. Maybe Bobrovsky doesn't have a great game and his price then doubles or something. I think there will be opportunities as well, depending how this thing shakes out on Saturday night. Okay, so we like the over in game one. Duclair is a series leading goal scorer. You like Eichel. You like Nick Waugh. I like Nick Waugh as well. And of course, Nick Cousins at the 200-1 dart throw. Let's actually now flip real quick to talk about next year's Stanley Cup odds. Bookmakers had put them out right when this series was set. The the one thing I want to say off the top is I'm excited by them. I usually don't care about like when these odds show up because so much changes in the off season, and we know what the bookmakers are doing. Like they're trying to gauge a little interest, see what they can kind of, if some quick money comes in on a team, then they can say, oh God, like maybe we underestimated this team, etc. And they also know that places will write content about them and can help drive more eyeballs to their sports books. That said, the reason I am excited has nothing to do with truly a bet, but more just the way it sets up. So Colorado is 8-1, Boston is 8-1, Toronto 9-1, Edmonton 10-1, the Devils, Hurricanes 12-1, Rangers, Panthers, Lightning, Stars, Knights, and Flames are in the teens as well. And then I'm not going to read through them all, but what this is telling me right off the bat is that the NHL won't have a consensus favorite or an overwhelming consensus favorite like we have in the past few years, whether it was the Avalanche the past two, and then you've had Tampa a couple of times. Like it looks like the top of the board is starting to spread out a little bit more, which is exciting to me. I think these playoffs have kind of shown us once again that like the NHL's parity is insane, and that's nice. My guess is that Edmonton ends up going off on opening night as the Stanley Cup favorite. But do you have any general thoughts here on how this thing sets up?
Yeah, I'm always so excited when these lines come out first, and you get to try to set the value. And I'm very excited looking at this because I think that this year, especially looking at these outrights, I'm just hoping that some of the to make and miss playoffs are set based off where some of these teams are at because there's going to be so much value. The one that jumped off the board to me as just being wrong, and they're not going to be this on opening night, is the Kraken are 50-1 to win outright. And I just don't see in what world that makes any sense. They are closer to the absolute bottom than the top, which is just giving no respect to what they did this year. When I think if you look at it logically, they should be as good or better next year, other than maybe the goaltending situation still iffy. But it's not like they had great injury luck this year. Like their top point getter went down in January or February, whatever it was, with Burakovsky. They've got some RFA situations to sort out, but nothing crazy. Like I would expect Vince Dunn to be back often enough that I think you can definitely just take 50-1 now. And this free agent class sucks. We all know it. I think that teams that overspend are probably going to wear it long term. Like it's probably one where like smarter teams that aren't going to be too aggressive aren't locking up guys because you're just going to pay such a tax to get such middling players this free agency. But the Kraken do have a pretty good situation, and I still like where some of their young guys coming up are. So yeah, the case for them is pretty easy. I just think that it's a misprice, and probably everywhere is shorter by the time the season rolls around. So that's the one. I think Ottawa is kind of interesting too, where they're at, and I guess Buffalo when it's going to be so competitive. And a lot of these aren't going to be ones you're going to like. You're just wanting to get into like round 2 or round 3 or whatever it is. But I agree, it looks super wide open. Like none of the Avs being the outright favorite for someone who's loved this Avs team is just outrageous. They have some legitimate problems. I am all over the place, so I don't really see how they're going to be that much better than this year. It seems like they're kind of nestling in closer to everyone else at this point, I think. And then the one, I'm on this, but I would absolutely love if Florida can be like the third favorite next year with like a point total of like 107 something, if they come in as the Cup champs. I'm already licking my chops at the thought of kind of fading them after this, because I do think it's going to set up for a tough regular season.
Yeah, the kind of the teams I've circled right now as potential fade candidates. Colorado, you mentioned. Um, Boston as a missed the playoffs long shot. Uh, it's that division. You just said Ottawa and Buffalo. Detroit, you'd imagine takes a step forward, even if it's just a little bit, taking away a couple points from uh, Boston, Toronto, Tampa. That division is gonna hopefully. I mean, we say this a lot with in the NHL, and then it ends up shaking out the same or similarly. But that division should be a lot more pressure packed than it's been in years past. So, uh, actually, that's I don't think Boston or Colorado. I mean, I think Edmonton ends up like I said. I think it's going to end up being with Edmonton as the favorite, and then I think Carolina would
And the
depend,
Devils, the Devils,
and the
they're
Devils.
one of the
Yeah,
teams that's got to be
yeah.
good. Like
I think
there's no way the Devils aren't good next year.
yeah. I'd agree. I think Edmonton, and it's not going to be like clear. I think it'd be like Edmonton in that like 8-1 favorite, Carolina and New Jersey right behind them in the East, and then from there, who knows? I mean, because you look at the four favorites right now: Colorado, question marks all over the place. Boston, no idea who's coming back yet. Question marks about players like Bertuzzi, Orlov, uh, Bergeron, Krejci, important players for this team. They got absolutely world-beating goaltending, and sure they lapped the field, five times over, but there's just a lot of questions there. The Maple Leafs, God knows what's going to happen with that team in the summer, and that puts us on Edmonton, who I think is at least like on more stable footing than the others, um, and then the Devils and Hurricanes. So I think that those three teams will end up taking the money, like put them as favorites. Uh, Looking at long shots, I mean this isn't a cup thing, but I know, and you're gonna talk a lot about them in a few months, and I don't want to spoil it, but the Blue Jackets, uh, interested to see where like they're right now priced as one of the worst teams in the NHL. I think that they're probably seventh worst, in terms of like where they'll end up, their situation will end up for next season. So, and then yeah, that middle of the pack is going to be interesting. We'll see. I think we could have another situation where I'm slamming my fist on the desk saying the buy low on Washington, but uh,
Uh, we
we'll
don't.
see.
The stars aren't there. The stars aren't there. You
Yeah,
can't win with what they got. Is my problem. I think it's too hard in the East to have
yeah, it could. Yeah,
Kuznetsov and Ovi trying to play other teams. I think they could be a bounce back in terms of like make playoffs markets, that sort of thing. But I think that day is past where the
yeah. We'll
Caps
see.
have
We'll see how
star
they
power.
what they do though.
Yeah, and then
Uh,
the other one too. Last thing, I think ideally we'll try to come with some more concrete stuff maybe near the end of the series on the draft, because this draft is pretty fascinating. I honestly think in the time I've like deeply paid attention to drafts, this top 10 is as interesting as it gets, because the case for so many guys is so compelling. There's a lot of years where I think everyone on Twitter and all these, armchair GMs, it's kind of obvious what you think someone should do. I think this year's really complicated because of the case that Will Smith is making and Leo Carlson, and then the whole Michkov thing. On top of that, it's just fascinating, and I do think it's the kind of thing where if you really pay attention, hopefully there could leak into having some betting value, because some sites do have long numbers on guys to go in very specific positions. So we'll see. I'm definitely pumped about it.
Perfect. All right. So that's it. We got you set up for game one of the Stanley Cup final. We'll be back ahead of every game, even on the weekends for the cup final. So we'll be back again on Sunday night for Monday morning ahead of game 2. For Dick Barton, I'm Michael Leboff. Thanks again to BetMGM for sponsoring the show, and good luck with all your bets.